So during COVID, I bought my first adult bike, and just being able to open up and experience the full River Valley from Henday to Henday. And then this year, I'm really excited about it because I get to share it with my kids. My kids are old enough to go mountain biking now, and that's going to be really, really fun.
Do you find they can keep up to you?
No, but it's more of like taking your time and teaching them a life skill that maybe I didn't have an opportunity to go mountain biking when I was young. So being able to teach them when they're 7 and 5 is pretty cool.
Welcome. This is Uncommon Sense, a CPA podcast presented by the Heshi CPA Knowledge Center. The center is an initiative of the CPA Education Foundation, the charitable arm of the chartered professional accountant profession in Alberta. For the record, this CPA podcast isn't about bean counting. Our episodes feature conversations with Alberta CPAs sharing their insights on a wide range of timely topics.
Hello, I'm Jessica de Groot with the CPA Education Foundation. I am your host for this episode, and it's an episode I think listeners will find uniquely interesting. Our guest today is Matthew Alexander CPA. Matthew is Vice President of Finance and Administration at Future Fields, a biotechnology company based in Edmonton. Since earning his CPA designation in 2014, Matthew has worked in public accounting as well as in industry. In 2020, he joined Future Fields and shortly thereafter assumed his current role as Vice President. On this episode, Matthew is going to give us an overview of the groundbreaking work being done at Future Fields in the field of biotechnology, work that includes, believe it or not, creating protein from fruit flies. Yes, we'll be geeking out a little bit in this episode, but Matthew has promised to keep the science talk at a really basic level so that everyone can understand how biotechnology is being harnessed to advance science in the areas of healthcare, food supply, and the environment. Welcome, Matthew, and thanks for joining me to talk about all of this.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So before we get into your work at Future Fields, can you give us a brief overview of your career path from the time that you earned your accounting designation to now?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say I had a fairly typical career path, at least in the start of it. Mm-hmm. I'm a legacy CA, so I entered the CA program in 2012. Worked at one of the larger local firms here in Edmonton, large enough that it had the full suite of valuations, audit, tax. I spent most of my time on small and medium-sized businesses, allowed me to gather a fairly wide breadth of exposure to multiple industries, different companies. Throughout that course, I found that I really liked working with owners and operators, specifically in the area of how does their business work? What are the problems they have? How do we solve those? Mm-hmm. So a little bit more than just coming in and doing your audit. And throughout that course, after I got my CA, I decided I either want to do something specialized, think tax or valuation, or go into something in industry, a controller role, an analyst role. I was pretty lucky that when I decided to make that change, it just so happened that a company I worked with before was looking for a controller. So I started as their group controller, and I was fortunate enough that, again, the role and the company and the shareholders were really good fit for me. They're very entrepreneurial. Mm-hmm. So I stayed there for about 6 years, working my way from financial controller all the way up to a VP of finance. I learned a lot in that role, in areas where people don't typically think accountant should stay. I of course did the accounting and the finance, but did a lot of HR and strategy, legal and operations of the business as well, to the point where operations became the major point of my role.
Yeah, I think you definitely succeeded in finding something more specialized.
Yeah, and then during this time, I started with the support of shareholders. I started to dabble in entrepreneurship. So started a company and eventually became a major shareholder of that separate company. Mm-hmm. And then in 2020, I started to perform fractional CFO work, mainly as advisors or kind of as an outside help to a controller or a VP of finance that needs a little bit more help with more technical operational stuff. And that's how I started as an advisor at Future Fields, where I currently work full-time.
Awesome. So being a vice president of finance and administration in your company is obviously a very senior position. How have your CPA skills and education helped you to earn that role and then succeed in that position?
Yeah, my CPA skills and education have contributed pretty heavily to being able to provide value to companies, which ultimately allowed me to work my way from an advisor into a full-time role at Future Fields in 2020. I often view the skills acquired through my CPA or the result of being a CPA are the foundational skills needed in my position. I'm not elbow deep in the handbook dealing with very classical accounting problems, but it allows me, the CPA education rather, allows me to have a technical and analytical skills that help me kind of use that as the springboard to address day-to-day challenges.
And CPAs are highly viewed as financial and technical experts, obviously, but there's no doubt that these so-called soft skills, such as communication, professionalism, teamwork, and so on, are also part of a CPA's skill set. How important have these soft skills been to you in your career?
Yeah, my opinion on this has evolved over the course of my career. For the better part of my articling and shortly after, I was definitely over-anchored on quantitative skills. Maybe that has something to do with being an introvert and liking to be on a computer and tackling problems that way. But it wasn't that I didn't see the value in the soft skills, but they were an afterthought or took a backseat to the quantitative analysis. So now I'm still analytically focused, but I've come to learn that when you're dealing with different stakeholders, being able to effectively communicate the quantitative calculation you made or the solution that you've come up with is just as important as the actual math behind it. I think it's a two-way street too. Unfortunately, life's not a case study. Not all the relevant information magically appears before you on a sheet. So working with the rest of the team and asking questions, understanding the processes results in a better quantitative analysis. I think sometimes you discover that you're only treating the symptom of the problem and not the root cause of the problem.
Right.
And I think it becomes even more important as you shift into an operational finance role to start doing that type of qualitative analysis on top of quantitative analysis.
I think too, just like the technical skills would, the more soft skills sometimes take a little bit longer or develop over a longer period of time than maybe something that comes a little bit more naturally to others. I know you mentioned being an introvert, and so sometimes you have to push yourself a little bit more out of the comfort zone in order to kind of get to that point.
Yeah, and I think I can give a great thanks to my first role as a controller for doing that, right? Taking myself out of the normal audit or small business year-end kind of individual into a person that needs to grow and have better relationships with the rest of the managers in the company in order to develop a long-term strategic plan for, say 5 years. It's really hard to do that by sitting behind a desk only looking at your accounting system. So again, I think accountants operate in multi-different realities at once. One's accounting reality, and the other one is what's actually happening in the business. And our role is to match the two.
So you're working in a company that is involved in some very complicated and exciting scientific work. Are you someone who has always had an interest in science and biology in particular, or is your professional interest limited to finance and administrative matters?
Yeah, this is a good question. No, my formal science education ended in high school. I took Bio 30 and Chem 30, and that was it. So I wouldn't say that I've always had an interest in science. I would definitely say that I like to understand how things work. I consider myself to be very mechanical in nature, mechanical in thought process. I think that's why I ended up as a CPA. It's not because I like math. It's because I find accounting to be a methodical and mechanical way to address problems. And I think on a very basic science level, because science is quite a deep field. That's why I'm interested in what we're doing at Future Fields. It's really cool to look at something like biology or chemistry, these huge areas of expertise, where I'm picking up little tidbits off the top that are absolutely just mind-blowing. So I have a very supportive team that answers all my basic questions, and it's really nice to have AI or Google to kind of augment that. But I think somebody in my position needs to have a basic understanding of what their team does, even if it is outside the scope of their normal role.
Yeah, absolutely. I know even just looking at your website at first glance, I thought, oh gosh, I don't know what I'm going to be able to talk to him about if he's really, because it is very technical looking at first glance, and there's a lot of, big sciencey words. So, but yeah, you're right. In your role, it is important that you kind of know what's going on to some degree. Can you talk a little bit more about the work that Future Fields does? To begin, to help our listeners who, like me, don't have an advanced background in science, can you define what biotechnology is and the term applies to Future Fields?
Yeah, absolutely. So biotechnology is technology that leverages nature or biology or the biological processes. So generally speaking, it's using a living thing, a plant, an animal, a tiny organism, or a cell to make a product or address a problem. So at Future Fields, our tech is around Drosophila, which is a scientific name for a fruit fly.
Okay. And what is the mandate of Future Fields as a biotechnology company? What is the underlying vision there?
Yeah, so at Future Fields, we believe biotechnology should improve life on Earth, not harm it. In line with our mission, we work to integrate environmental, social, economic sustainability into the core of our operations. So, we see a future where embracing the full human experience doesn't compromise the health or viability of humanity or the planet.
And Future Fields is an Edmonton-based company. In your view, is Alberta a good place to situate a biotechnology enterprise? And do you think that Alberta has the potential to become a global center for this type of research and development?
Yeah, I think Alberta is an excellent place for biotech, life sciences, advanced manufacturing. We compete on a global scale at Future Fields for both investment as well as customers. So we think about this problem a lot. Economically, Edmonton, Alberta is a fantastic place to start, or even a relocated company. Rent's relatively inexpensive. It's readily available. Cost of living is low, lower than most other major cities. At one point, we did a technical economic analysis because why wouldn't you?
Yeah, of course.
Centered around the question of what would happen if we were operating in a different area. Think Boston or San Francisco, Vancouver, Toronto, something with a little bit more of a mature life sciences ecosystem. And what we found is that there's no way we would have been able to accomplish what we did at Future Fields in Edmonton in some of these other areas, just based on full cost of rent, cost of living, the additional salaries you need to pay people for working wages. So that's one really good point that I always boast about working in Alberta or having a company in Alberta. I think there's many other, for us, we're filling these very niche science roles, and we haven't had an issue filling them for local academic institutions. So we have, University of Alberta, Calgary, Lethbridge, NAIT, lots of other places turn out these, really great candidates. And I think having a cool company like ours that has interesting tech, it's nice to be able to pull those people into a role that they're well situated for. And then I think that the other final thing that I would say is we just recently completed a biomanufacturing facility, first of its kind. And we did it with local providers, local construction companies, local architects, without any real issues. So it's a pretty big testament what we have available for us here in Alberta. And anyways, it's been great. And I think we're all very pro Alberta, pro Edmonton.
Yeah, that's great. I'm obviously not an expert in biotechnology, so this is kind of the first I've heard of a company like this in Edmonton. Is it a fairly small industry here, or is it something that's growing quickly? What would your opinion be on that?
I would say even over the course of the last 5 years since I've been in Future Fields, the industry and the ecosystem has grown considerably. There's some great companies here that are doing amazing stuff. There's great support, a great support network. But yeah, it's definitely an industry that wasn't as big as it is now 10 years ago. Yeah.
So I understand that much of the work at Future Fields is focused on creating recombinant proteins. What is a recombinant protein, and what are those proteins used for? Did I say it right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you did. This is a great question. We get this all the time, and I think part of the issue is people automatically assume that we're making edible proteins or proteins that you consume. So I'll jump right into it and say that typical confusion point is recombinant proteins are not a typically ingested protein. It's not protein powder. It's not alternative protein for your diet. So recombinant protein is a scientific protein that's made from another living thing. So common examples, the most common that we often use is insulin, but it's pretty wide reaching. We have recombinant proteins are used for vaccines. They're used for enzymes for laundry detergent. They're used for pesticides. They're used in a wide range of industries, agriculture, industrial applications. They're typically made from bioreactors full of single-cell organisms, yeast, bacteria, whom we refer to that as E. coli, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the first thing that I kind of thought of, when you, I guess, speaks to your comment about what people always want to know, I'm like, is this something that's in the Beyond Meat burgers that we buy at the grocery store? What? But that's really interesting.
Yeah, I mean, the company was actually founded in 2019 with the idea of actually helping cellular agriculture. So if you're not familiar with cellular agriculture, it's growing cell-based products or in agriculture products, but without the animal. So actually the CEO developed a chicken nugget in his lab as part of his postdocs. And that's where the fly technology actually started, was to support that type of work. And we've now evolved into much, much bigger and broader markets.
Okay, cool. Okay, so I guess building off of that, I have to ask, because you mentioned that your company uses fruit flies to create these recombinant proteins. How exactly does that work?
Yeah. This is still something out of a sci-fi novel to me. And there's a long list of why we decided to use fruit flies, and I'm sure we'll get into some of those later on. But we start by taking a DNA or genetic instructions and inserting it into your fruit fly egg. That DNA would have several proprietary aspects of it, but ultimately it has the instructions of what protein of interest we want to inject into the fly. For the sake of conversation, we can say insulin. That population grows up. We confirm that it is indeed expressing that protein of interest. And the ability for that fly and all its offspring to also produce protein of interest or insulin stays forever. So we use techniques later on in the process to basically purify that protein into a 96, 98% pure protein, similar to what you would see in a pharmaceutical or therapeutic application.
And I kind of want to go back to the chicken nugget and I guess how it all started around the chicken nugget. How does your company's work contribute to addressing issues such as environmental protection and even addressing the world's food needs?
Yeah, so conventional recombinant protein technology, as I mentioned, uses bacteria, yeast, or animal cells that are cultivated in the big steel tank. Think when you go to a local brewery, something that looks like that. These cell cocktails require lots of fine-tuning, energy, and resources to run and harvest. Unlike these traditional systems, we don't use a bioreactor. Instead, we use a fruit fly. The cool thing about biology and nature is that it's hard to beat biology at scale. So flies are incredibly efficient. We're basically just harnessing the world's most efficient bioreactor. So the way this shakes out when we look at environmentalists, at our scale, our technology emits 86% less carbon and 74% less water than a conventional E. coli system that's produced in a bioreactor. So it's quite meaningful when you consider we're producing something with 14% of the CO2.
So thinking back to before this technology was available, what was being used if it wasn't extracted from a fruit fly? Was it just like a completely synthetic protein, or what was being used back then?
Yeah, so something very similar. They would use the common one that we often refer to as E. coli. Okay. So they take a single cell E. coli organism and genetically modify it to express the protein that they would want. I mean, the problem, I'm not a scientist, but the problem with E. coli is you're dealing with E. coli.
E. coli.
Yeah, exactly. So not only does it take a lot of energy and resources to make sure that it's growing in the tank correctly, you're limited to the confines of that tank, in addition to the fact that you're dealing with E. coli or other single-cell organisms that don't have the cellular machinery that our product does. So this becomes even more impactful when you start talking about, there's a subclass called difficult-to-express proteins. These proteins, as the name suggests, are proteins that are difficult to express in these conventional systems. This is an expanding area, and it's basically spurred on by huge breakthroughs in health and science research, or think AI proteins that are developed with the assistance of AI. The problem is that these proteins are difficult to express in conventional systems. So they often require more energy, high failure rates, or in some cases are unable to manufacture at scale. If it is the latter, they often just get shelved because they're infeasible to make at a commercial scale.
Okay. And you mentioned that a lot of the, I guess, what you use the protein for is like insulin and, things in healthcare. Can you talk about the work that Future Fields also does in the world of healthcare and with the potential of prolonging human life? I believe that this potential is something in which you have a great personal interest, in part due to a story in your own family. Can you share a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so as I was mentioning, unlike traditional systems, we don't rely on a single cell or a single organism. our technology has access to over 200 different cell types, as well as the interplay between those 200 cell types. So you can think of it as, a much more robust machinery in order to manufacture what you want to make. So I often think of it this way because I'm not a scientist. So if you have a pair of Allen keys and you're assembling your IKEA dresser, you can do fairly little trouble. You can even fix a bike, right? But when it comes to fixing your car, it becomes a much more difficult task to the point where you're going to be struggling to change your rotors on your car with 2 Allen keys. So we're uniquely positioned with our cellular machinery to address these challenging proteins. And most of these challenging proteins are in the area of health and human life. So as I mentioned, these proteins, which perform well at like a clinical trial stage, but due to the complexity of manufacturing, are basically not brought on for commercial use. They're shelved. In the future, we hope to play a huge role in these unmakeable proteins. The personal thing for me is I recently lost my mother to a long battle of lung cancer. She had a rare mutation that accounts for 1 to 2% of lung cancer patients. So while her cancer wasn't curable, she was able to receive treatments that greatly extended her life, which was incredible impact on my family and her friends. Her treatment was a class of these proteins that are considered difficult to express. So the fact that I get to play a small role, whether it's the financial or operational piece of a company that has the technology to bring more of these proteins to market, have that impact on other families quite considerable.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hear about your mom.
Thanks.
Do you think that there is like a greater potential for this work to be used in healthcare to like an even further extent in the future?
I believe so. Yes. Again, like I'm not a scientist, but all the data that we have suggests that our technology has ability to produce things that other systems can't. And we are working with some customers that intend to test that as well.
That's really exciting. Are there any other current or potential applications of your company's work that you can speak to?
So a lot of our current projects at Future Fields are confidential because what we're doing is we're producing novel proteins for these customers. So we want to make sure that we're obeying the laws of confidentiality on most of these. But what most customers are coming from us is this difficult to express protein. They want to utilize the full machinery of our system. But in addition to tackling these difficult proteins, our technology allows us unprecedented scale. So I think anybody that has banana in their kitchen can probably attest to fruit flies just grow. And that's when you don't want them to. So we spend a lot of time making sure that we have great homes and have a great place to rear as many fruit flies as we possibly can. The big thing here is that fruit flies are really low cost to rear. They're not constrained to a size of a bioreactor. So I think the math works out to being in 70 days, we'd be able to fill an Amazon warehouse full of flies.
Oh my gosh.
So we don't need to restart the production either. Like most bioreactors, think of a 1,000-liter tank that you see at a brewery. That needs to be drained and then restarted from scratch every time you do a new batch. Where for us, we already have the fly stock rearing and it's just continuous manufacturing. So the scale on top of continuous manufacturing basically allows us to address these certain products that we need huge volumes and regularly in comparison to these bioreactors.
Yeah, I'm just thinking right now about my home in August when they're typically really bad here. And yeah, like I don't even want to have a banana or a ripe tomato out on the counter because they're just crazy.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, like I said, they rear incredibly well. So consider us fly ranchers, but they are definitely bred and very efficient to continue to multiply.
Have you ever thought or tried or thought of maybe using like a different type of organism to do this work with?
We have. I think we would entertain the idea of using different organisms if we needed to. But right now, we have not even hit the limits of a single organism yet. So,
Right.
And I think the other thing is there's a lot of other companies that are using different types of tools or different types of expression systems. So for us to revert back to something like E. coli or yeast doesn't necessarily serve our intent of using our platform to its fullest.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there anybody that's using any other type of fly or insect or anything like that you know about?
Yes. So there is precedence where people have used insect cells themselves, so not the whole organism, but they actually just take like Drosophila cells or moth cells and use that. There is a couple companies in Europe that are using full moths. The challenge they have is they actually have to, instead of using genetic tools like we do where it's inserted into their DNA, they use something called baculovirus, which is, it's basically a virus that they use the virus as a delivery payload to bring in that protein of interest into the moth. The problem is they need to inject every single moth in order to do that. So it becomes quite labor intensive. Again, they do have the same challenges of making sure that it's appropriately expressed and has the right, comes out looking the right way.
Kind of the same challenges as the E. coli.
Exactly.
Yeah. So what does it feel like to you personally to be part of an organization that is doing work of such promising potential? When you first got your CPA designation, did you ever think that your career would bring you to such an organization?
No, absolutely not. I mean, I knew there was a wide swath of areas that you could use your CPA skills in, but I would never have thought that I would be I'd be VP of finance of advanced biomanufacturing company based on fruit flies, let alone based in Edmonton. So I would say there's no chance I would have thought I would end up here.
And do you have any thoughts on what your success in such a cutting-edge, science-focused company says about the value and flexibility that a CPA designation gives to somebody?
Yeah, I mean, I may be biased, but I think the one thing that the CPA designation gives you is the ability to address challenges or questions, and it's specifically from an analytical lens. And there's no shortage of those types of questions in myriads of different industries. So those challenges don't need to be confined to what a typical accountant does, tax or audit even. There's this huge field of challenging questions to be solved within companies as well.
Yeah, this has been so fascinating and such an eye-opening conversation. And I think you've really given our listeners a lot to think about. Before we wrap up, I just have one more question for you. Is there anything that has surprised you about being a CPA, something that has happened in your career that you didn't anticipate when you first set out to earn your designation?
To my younger self, I think most of my career would have been a surprise. Looking back, it makes sense in a step log thought process, but I would have never imagined setting off on the CPA track. It would landed me where I am today. I'm halfway through my career, so I'm excited to see what the next 20 years takes me as well. But I think, honestly, I look back over the big trajectory points in my career, and one of those was deciding to go to industry and having that huge inflection point. The second was joining a company like Future Fields with this big technological prowess and ability to really sink your teeth into doing something cool and meaningful and having that personal alignment.
Yeah, it is definitely really cool. And I'm sure it's exciting to wake up every day and see what the biotech world is going to bring you today.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the perfect spot to wrap up our conversation, Matthew. Thank you so much for being a guest on Uncommon Sense and for talking about your career as well as the work that you do at Future Fields. You've done a great job in explaining the complex ideas in plain language, which is very much appreciated. Thank you again, and best wishes for your continued career success.
Thanks for having me.
The Uncommon Sense podcast is presented by the CPA Education Foundation and funded by the Heshe CPA Knowledge Center. The Knowledge Center was created through a generous donation to the CPA Education Foundation by the late Brian Heshe. Brian was a distinguished Albertan, business leader, CPA, educator, and community builder. His generosity and commitment to education underpinned his good works across Alberta throughout his lifetime. We would like to acknowledge that the CPA Education Foundation offices are situated on the traditional Treaty 6 and Treaty 7 territories and Métis Nation homeland. The Foundation acknowledges that we reside on traditional and ancestral territories of many Indigenous, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Their histories and culture influence our community to this day. The CPA Education Foundation is committed to helping build a province where Indigenous people and their voices and experiences are heard, valued, respected, and celebrated. Technical and recording services for this podcast provided by Wolf Willow Studios in Edmonton. If you enjoyed this podcast, please be sure to like, subscribe, and tell your friends about us. If you have any comments on the podcast, write to us at cpaef@cpaalberta.ca. To learn more about the CPA Education Foundation and the Heshies CPA Knowledge Centre, visit cpaalberta.ca/foundation. Thanks for listening.